There is a belief that I am chosen, I am superior, the other are primitive, are animal, and the only way I survive in this neighborhood is by using a lot of military power. And that doesn't work. And that's what Jesus was saying to the people in his time. You think that you are going to have military rebellion against the Roman, it will resolve it. It will bring disaster on you. And that is true for everybody.
Hello and welcome to the Follower Podcast, a place for honest conversations about following Jesus to the depths of his heart and the ends of the earth. I'm your host, Matthew Lewis, and I'm so glad that you have joined us. Well, hello everybody and welcome to the Follower Podcast. As you know, we're in this series on reconciliation, and this is actually a two-part conversation on reconciliation in the conflict between Israel and Palestine and the surrounding regions at the moment. And if you have been listening, we just recently brought out a conversation with Orna Grinman, who is a Jewess living in Jerusalem. But we wanted to bring tension and balance to that conversation by having the perspectives from a Palestinian person. And so today on the conversation, we have Dr. Salim Munayer, and welcome to the Follower Podcast, Dr. Salim.
Welcome and good morning.
So good to have you with us. And as we've just said before we jumped on to record, my first point of call is I just wanted to extend condolences to you and to the people of Palestine at the moment. There was no really words to describe what you're going through, but I just wanted to recognize that, and that this is not a light conversation necessarily. But it's an important one to have. And so I really just appreciate you making the time to have it with us. So thank you for that. So Dr. Salim he heads up a ministry called Musalaha, which means reconciliation in Arabic. Been doing that since 1990. And this ministry really is promoting, teaching, and facilitating reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. You're also an adjunct professor at Fuller, is this right? Fuller Theological Seminary?
Yes, and Hebrew U, and also I used to be the academic dean at Bethlehem Bible College.
Okay,
I have an academic hat.
Yeah. And you've written a number of books as well, Through My Enemy's Eyes, as well as How Long, O Lord, Journey Through the Storm, and others that we could go on with. So
the recent book that has been published 2 weeks ago, yes, Reconciling Justice, just came out.
Okay, Reconciling Justice, what is that? What is the basic idea of that?
The idea is that the issue or the subject of justice has not been addressed properly in reconciliation. It's like we have a bipolar view, like reconciliation, restoring relationship, and not addressing systematic structure of injustice. And in the cross of Jesus, the love of God and the justice of God have met together. So I advocate, I'm saying that both things are together. If you love someone, you are or you want to be in redemptive action and relationship from any form of oppression. So if I love my wife and say to her, I love her, and she suffer, my love is not really real. The word, the righteousness of God in Hebrew and Greek, is the justice of God. And that issue has been neglected quite a bit. And the other aspect of it is if you ask for justice without restoring relationship, justice can turn into revenge. So we need to have both aspects, the love and justice of God, to come together. In our context, as the Christian community in the Middle East and in Israel, Palestine, we are not only need to look into justice in our context as a Christian, but also how our surrounding communities, the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the different stream in each faith, how they view justice, and the learning from the rich and history and endeavor in this issue of justice, and to present a Christian perspective that address not only what Christians think and feel, but also how that relate to the others. In matter of fact, by doing it, you discover that there's certain aspect of biblical justice that we have neglected, that the other can teach us a lot about that. So that is part of the book that came out recently. Reconciling Justice has been published by Cascade. So just came out in the beginning of July.
I love this idea of learning about justice from other communities and other perspectives as well. I think it's really important. So we'll include all those links in the show notes if you are interested in any of Dr. Salim's books. Dr. Salim, we're talking about this issue of reconciliation, particularly in the context of Israel-Palestine at the moment. This conflict has kind of broken out into fever pitch now. There are so many different perspectives and angles on this. And really, the hope for this conversation is that we do something to bring more clarity to the realities of what are happening. So if you're able to, maybe some of your story, just to help us connect a little bit with how you find yourself where you are. And then maybe I'm imagining someone who's listening to this podcast who doesn't really have all the context. So if you could build for us a little frame of reference, what is this conflict about and where is it coming from? Without giving us an extensive overview.
Yeah, yes, that is, it truly is that the Israeli Jewish narrative, historical narrative, and the Palestinian is the most contested narrative right now in many places. But for a long time, the dominant narrative that was around, especially for Christian, was what I call it the Israeli Zionist Jewish narrative and Christian Zionist narrative. And there was not a space and room for the Palestinian Christians specifically voice to be heard. So if you go to Christian bookstores, you will find many books about the end time as related to Israel and situation in the Middle East, but rarely, if not at all, any books that present the Palestinian Christians' side. So maybe by telling about myself, and that would maybe help our listener. And I'll try to be as much as possible, because I am also a professor. I teach also history to present people not only with my biases, but everybody's biases, but several important facts. First of all, I'm Palestinian Christians, and Palestinian people, Palestine is a name that's been designated to this area since the Assyrian time, and it was a Greek time, but it was a bridge between Africa and Asia and Europe. But the people of this land all the time were mixed because it was a major highways of civilization throughout history. And this is also the reason why God chose to reveal himself in this land. But also the name of the land has the land of Canaan, it was the land of Israel, Judea, many names. But the dominant name that to include all this area was called Palestine. So Palestinian people until 1948, it could be Muslim, Christian, Jews, anyone. There were Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Muslims, and Palestinian Christians. Palestinian Christians, we trace our history back from the time of Jesus. We are not converted from Islam, as some people think that, and they ask me, when you have been converted? As a matter of fact, at the time of Jesus, as we read the book of Acts, there were the disciples of Jesus, they were part of the Jewish people at that time, or the children of Israel. Even so, Judaism came to be as it is today differently much later. So there were three components in short time. One is the disciple of Jesus, who were from Jewish and mixed group, Arab Christians that lived in the land all the time, like the Edomite and the Betian and Moabite, like the grandmother of Jesus was Arab, Ruth the Moabite. This is to deal with our racist views. So Gospel of Matthew makes sure to give us that there are four ladies, none of them are from descendant of Abraham. We have the Rahab, the Canaanite, and we have Ruth the Moabite, and Tamar, and Bathsheba. None of them is from the purity of race. So we see ourselves as we have universal testimony that in this land, this is the land of the fathers, of prophet. This is the land where Jesus born, taught, healed, crucified, and resurrected. And we live mostly on the very, very important geographical part in the land, like Bethlehem, Jerusalem, where I live right now, Nazareth, Galilee, and also the early scent of the church. And I'm coming from city of Lydda, today, and also in Hebrew, Lod, close to the airport. It used to be called, before Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport, used to be called Lyd Airport. It's the city of St. George. St. George is his mother from Lydda. His father was a Roman, and he became a believer, and his father was executed by the Roman because of his faith, and also his son, George, was under threat, and he found refuge in the city. He's a patron of England also, but he's a patron of Palestinian Christian. You see him portrayed on a horse killing the dragon. And the dragon here represents from the book of Revelation is the empire, evil empire, at that time, the Roman Empire. Because in time of persecution, you hold to the faith, you have resilience. We called in Arabic sumud. You rooted and grounded yourself in the land. And as a result, St. George became the symbol of Palestinian Christian in the face of 2,000 years of challenges. We are here and we are a testimony that what it's written in the gospel is truly happened and truly happened in history and in this space and this geographical location. So when we move, of course, it's not a class in history, we move to the current situation, especially the conflict, and terminology is very important and words important. The conflict is between the Israeli Jews. Not all Jews are Israelis, and not all Israeli are Jews, because I'm Palestinian Christian and I'm Israeli citizen. So 20+% of the population of Israel are Palestinians, and others, other than the occupied territory of the West Bank, is Jerusalem and Gaza. So west of the Jordan River, we have approximately 50% Palestinian, Christian and Muslim, and a little bit less than 50% is Israeli Jews. That is the reality in the land. So in my hometown, where my grandfather built the church of St. George, the current church has been built, destroyed, typical history of the Middle East. And as a result of 1948, the city of Lydda got conquered by Jewish forces, Israeli Jewish forces, Haganah at that time, militant Jewish group forces. And in Lydda, it was committed one of the biggest atrocity against Palestinians that were defenseless, and where there was a massacre, and the people of Lydda were ordered to leave the city, part of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. The Israeli historian define it in his book, Ilan Pepe, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It's a very important book for many people. So when the army ordered my father to leave, he decided to go to the church, and refuge in the church, were able to stay. They were not allowed to go back to their home, and they became refugees in their hometown, and they were living in the church and monastery in an area that was defined as the Arab ghetto until today. And it was very interesting that the soldiers that were doing that, many of them came from Europe, and they defined the place as Arab ghetto. So they had a kind of less than 1 mile barbed wires where they were confined. They had to find water and food and suffer from starvation, lack of water. And my family, that used to be one of the most richest family in the area. Matter of fact, if you land in Ben Gurion Airport, most of the lands east of the airport used to belong to our family. Wow. So in one day, they lost everything, not only land, not only history. One of the most important things that they lost is their indigeneity, that the culture, the history, the tradition, and they were not allowed to celebrate that and to acknowledge that. So you were not allowed to call yourself Palestinian. A new definition has been given to them by the government that they're Arab Israelis. And the reason for that they're Arabs so they can find solutions somewhere else. It's like to say in South Africa, you are black, and not acknowledging your specific identity with history, geography, and location, and identity as a tribe or whatever it is. And without growing to Orthodox family, Christian family, where my parents, to their credit, they never taught us to hate. They taught us all the time to forgive. And they had this Christian values is very, very important. How you remember and the horrible things that happened to you, and how you pass it on to the next generation, that the next generation will not grow up in hate and bitterness and revenge seeking. That is something that's very important. I think how we remember the past in order to live, to be instrument of God in the present and the future. I went to Arab school. Most of the kids were Muslim. I went to Christian school. Then I went to Jewish high school because there were no other high school, Christian high school in my hometown, and the only option was to go far away to Nazareth. And at that time, the perception was that the Jewish high school academically better than the Arab Palestinian one. So here I am, Palestinian Christian boy in Jewish high school, and immediately get exposed to the Jewish narrative that dwell very much on the experience of the Jews in Europe and the Holocaust. And one of my fellow students, classmate, one time asked me, "Are you Christian or Muslim?" I said, "Christian," and he said, "You're worse." So I began to ask question, how come people that call Christian belong to my faith group have committed so horrible things to the family of my friends that we used to play and visit and eat together and all of that. So I questioned that. But also I realized that we have here what we call in defining our conflict as a settler colonial conflict. So you have a group of people, mainly in Eastern Europe, Eastern European Jews, that suffer a lot because of ideology, anti-Semitic ideology, to be the others, but also the breakdown of the empire of Eastern Europe and the rise of nation state, especially in Eastern Europe. And the question is what we as Jews were doing there, how we find ourselves in the context to be Polish, Ukrainian, or Russian, or others. But here we have another aspect that entered to it, that to the classical anti-Semitic European ideology, what we call political anti-Semitic ideology, where Jews felt threatened, and they were threatened and not welcome. So millions of Jews wanted to go to Europe, or especially England and America. It was a huge, major refugee crisis that in history, we used to, at that time, they used to call it the Jewish problem. But sadly, Europe, Western Europe, England, and later America didn't want to have all those millions of Jews going into America. This is one of the reasons there are many Jews in New York, for example, because this is where most refugees went in the first trip to America. But also at that time, came a new movement among the Jews. We call it Zionism. Zionism is a national movement of the Jewish people, that they said our solution is like the European. We need to have a nation state where two major things will change. One, the new Jewish man, a man that is not dependent on the other, on the Gentile, doesn't have to pay to survive, doesn't have to bow down, he said, but also realize and acknowledging a lot of what anti-Semitic in Europe was saying, that the Jewish society is sick, that the Jewish society need to change, and the Jewish society they need to plow the land and also defend themselves. So the one side plow, another side rifle. But they couldn't find the solution for a Jewish state in Europe. So they were thinking about Uganda, Argentina. Then, of course, because of historical and religious attachment to the land, let's do it in Palestine. That's what they said. Because at that time in Palestine, 5% of the population, they were Jews, part of the culture and the people of the land, part of the indigenous people of the land. Many of the Palestinian, Muslim and Christian are coming from Jewish descent. So desperate people for religious persecution or culture or whatever reasons are going to establish for themselves a nation state, homeland in somewhere else. And somewhere else, it was not empty. Palestine was not desert. This is in my class, going back to my class was studying history, and the teacher said, oh, the land was desert, and we came and we turned it into green. And I said to the teacher, excuse me, if you look from the window of the classroom, you see all those orange fields. My grandparents planted them. Mm-hmm. And you see the houses, you see the big building of the church. My grandfather built it. So, so the land was not empty. There were people living there. It was flourishing. And the people had very strong identity as Palestinian because they also were going through their own national aspiration to establish Palestinian state. But in order for Zionism to succeed, they need empire. And after seeking different empires to help them, European empire at that time, we're talking about before First World War and also during First World War, they found Britain willing to do that. And why Britain was willing to help, that later expressed itself with the Balfour Declaration, that I'll talk about it. This is the root of all evil. Basically, Britain has several reasons. One, the leaders and upper class of Britain were anti-Semitic. They didn't want the Jews there. They described them as speaking Yiddish, dressing black, different language, different culture, different smell. Even British Jews didn't want them there. So we have a crisis. So they didn't want all those million refugees to come. Same problem we have in Europe today. Second issue is that the Ottoman Empire were breaking down, and there was competition. Who is going to take the biggest piece of that falling empire? Britain, France, or Russia? And also the importance of the Suez Canal leading to India, to South Africa, and all that. As today, 80% of the commerce from Europe to the East used to go through Suez Canal until today. So how we go? We need. So you have there the anti-Semitic ideology. They have political reasons. We need people like close to us that will be part of the empire and living and ruling there. And also with the competing between France and England, this community will be loyal to the British because the British gave them the right to have a homeland in Palestine. So there are other reasons, and that is prevalent among today what we call Christian Zionism and Evangelical. It is started in Scotland, in fact, what we call dispensational theology that spread quite a bit by certain elite group in Britain in the Church of England and other groups, and also the Brethren. Basically is perceiving the history of the world that we're coming toward the end time. But before the second coming of Jesus, several things are going to happen. The Jews left the land, so the Jews need to return to restore the kingdom of King David and to take over Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple in order to inaugurate this Gog and Magog and second coming of Jesus. And this theology, dispensational, that called today Christian Zionism, not only says that, it is began to say that God has two people, the Jews, Israel, and the church. When in the Bible there is one people, include all ethnic groups. So Israel is the people of the Old Testament, and the church is the people of the New Testament. Israel will inherit the earth, and the church will inherit the heaven. It's really racist theology. And why? Because Abraham has a vision, the sand of the sea, that there will be the Jews, and the stars in the sky, there will be the heaven. That is a Christian. So that our destiny is not to be in what it's written in the book of Revelation, the new heaven, new earth. Our destiny is somewhere else. Escapism. Escapism from the world, escapism from the whole trouble of the world, escapism, matter of fact, adopting Greek philosophy of Epicurean, dividing the world to earthly and heavenly world. That is not biblical. There is a creator and there is creation, and God cares for his creation. This is God loved the world. This is the reason he sent his son to die for. And he wants to restore, redeem for new heaven, new earth. He is going to dwell in this new creation that he is going to do. That's the book of Revelation here. But in order to do that, and this is really what I call crusade mentality. Crusade mentality means that I can use politics and military in order to fulfill the prophecy that I think need to happen, the way I interpret it. So they saw themselves the people with destiny. The British people, later American took that place. And our destiny as the British people, we are the chosen people for this time in order to help the second coming in Jesus by helping those people that suffer very much to come into Palestine to establish the Jewish group. And I, as Palestinian Christian, in their definition, I was a half Christian. I'm not fully Christian because I'm just bell and incense. Our churches is just liturgy. They are the true Christian. They found a way. And the Muslim was totally disregarded because anti-Semitic ideology until Second World War was defined to Semite people. So Arabs, Muslims, and Jews were in the same camp. As a result of the Holocaust, a process happened in the Western world, in the church, and also among the Jews, that the Western world, the church, out of the guilt of the Holocaust and the completion of the church, made the Jews almost white, almost Christian, and we started developing this category, Christian Jewish civilization. Jews will be horrified with that, because Jews theologically are closer to Muslim than to Christian, basically because we believe that God incarnate in Jesus. So the ultimate others stayed the Muslims, the Arab. So you ask yourself the question, why many people are silent? Because they don't perceive Palestinian as human beings as they are. So this people group, the Zionist movement at that time came in order to establish a Jewish state in Palestine on the expense of the Palestinian. And in order to do that, the Palestinian needed to be moved out in order to make room for the Jews. That is the bottom line. And that's what's happening in East Jerusalem. That's what happened in 48. That is still going on in the West Bank right now. If somebody read the news about the settlers moving and kicking people, and that was the intent, was a mass bombing in Gaza post October 7, that the people will be, the 2,200,000 will move into Sinai, into Egypt, and Egypt said no, and the people learned the lesson of 48. If we move, we will never come back. And so that is it's all that combination, but the ability to do that came in the beginning by Britain. Same story, we have it in South Africa, and also in South Africa. In order to justify it, you have several aspects of it: racial superiority to Afrikaans, that it being justified from verses in the book of Genesis, and racial justification. You have it about the Jewish people, the chosen people, and also by using biblical interpretation in order to justify it. So you have racial superiority and religious reasoning to do that. And that's so sad, because we, as followers of Jesus, in our reconciliation, we need to ask the question all the time: how our theology impacting our neighbors or our enemy? Because our theology is, because God called us to love Him, to love neighbor, to love our enemies. And if our theology is causing damage to our neighbor, it's not Christ theology. Like, if our theology is blessing to our neighbors, that is the right way.
Yeah.
So that is so what's happened to me, that in the classroom I was challenged by it, but all of the story. But then something else happened. Suddenly, a group of German Christians came to our high school, and I was so excited. Christians, I'm struggling with my Christian identity, my Christian teaching. I'm hearing the Jewish story in Europe, and that the Christian did this, and how my church is very liturgical and beautiful, but doesn't provide me the information. I was in a mess. Identity searching, asking questions. Add to that confusion, search and look. Group of German Christians came, and I was so excited. Can you really be friends? We're minority. Then one of them said to me, Salim, frankly, we're not coming for you as Palestinian Christian. We're coming to the Jews. I said, why? He said, we suffer too. Do you see our suffering? Yeah, he said, but really we're coming for the Jews. And this is the end time, and you need to move out. If you don't move out, you will be destroyed. I said, excuse me, this is good news you're bringing me? And I said, why? They said, this is the end time, and you are an obstacle for the second coming of Jesus. Sure. So I turned to them and said, do you want to tell me that we, a Palestinian Christian that survived here for 2,000 years, we are an obstacle for the second coming of Jesus and the redemption and the salvation of all the world? And they said to me, yes. And that was awful. So in that context, I ended up in a Bible study that we were a group of Jews and from my high school, Israeli Jews and Palestinian, asking a lot of questions. You're much younger than me, I think. It's kind of in the 70s. It was kind of the end of the hippie era. We were asking a lot of questions. So in this Bible study, I found Jesus that deal with the Roman Empire, with occupation, dealing with the Sadducees, with corruption of political, religious leaders, economic leaders. And that Jesus spoke to me so much. And by then I was in Tel Aviv University, and I knew things were happening in the land, that many young Israeli Jews and Palestinians traveled to Europe and met Christian. And one of the places they went is while I'm in Amsterdam. in the red light district. Remember, you know that place?
Mm-hmm.
They went there because they heard the cheap price, clean place, met YWAM people, got witness, became believers, came back to the land. So at that time, it used to be called Hebrew Christian.
Mm-hmm.
They came back to the land and then encounter very old age missionary and like Emmanuel House in Jaffa. And so they turned to me and said, you speak Hebrew, you speak Arabic, why don't you start teaching them Bible? So I start doing that. So I realized that instead of being town planner, I'm enjoying more to be teaching the Bible.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to seminary to study in seminary, and I studied in seminary, came back to the land, and immediately, because there were very few theologian trained local people were in the land. So I was teaching Israeli Jews, believers in Tel Aviv, Jaffa area, mostly, and Bethlehem Bible College in Bethlehem just started. And here I'm going to Bethlehem. I was a typical California beach boy, Tel Aviv beach boy, long hair. If you see old photos. And the reality of the occupation, the reality of curfew, the reality of the life of people was horrible. That was shocking. And my students challenged me very much, asked me, should we go to demonstration? Should we throw stones? We need to resist the occupation taking our land. One of my students' land has been taken by Jewish settler, and his father and the Jewish settler from America were arguing about that. And the Jewish settler produced Bible, said the Bible says this land is my land. And all those questions did not teach me in systematic theology 1, 2, and 3 at seminary. So I had to endeavor into the theology of the land. And my students said, the Bible defined our identity, and suddenly the Bible is a weapon against us, and we don't want to read the Hebrew scripture, the Old Testament. I said to him, no, for your defense of theology of the land, it is in the Hebrew scripture, because what they present to you is wrong. And this is the reason I endeavor with others to write the book, The Land Cries Out, to develop theology of the land. And Palestinian Christian were having a landmark in that theology of the land to counter that. But my Jewish Israeli students, believers in Jesus, were dealing with their identity, how I am believers in Jesus in the light of the church and synagogue horrible relationship, horrible, and also sometimes the better relationship in Europe. One dealing with identity and one dealing with another set of questions. But one thing that brought them together is asking the same question. It was the first Intifada. That was in 1987, 88, was when the Palestinian rebelled against the occupation. It was a civil movement, and mostly non-violence, something that maybe similar to some of the events happened in South Africa. And the reaction of the army was awful at that time, breaking the bones and shooting. And I saw that in front of my eyes. Then we wanted our students to go to Galilee, and because I speak Hebrew, I went to the army post in order to produce documents for them to go to Galilee, where Jesus was. And they were not allowed to go. So as I was there, saw the officer that he was students with me at Tel Aviv University, and he called me. It was a very embarrassing point. What are you doing with soldiers? All this line of Palestinians standing, suddenly one officer calls you. That is good. So I recognized him and we had a talk. He asked me what you're doing. And so I told him. Then I looked at him and said, what's happened to you? Because you have changed. And he said, in a minute I put uniform. In a minute you put me in position of power above people. We as human change. Occupation, imbalance of power, oppressing people, does not only damage the oppressed, it damages the oppressor.
Right.
In 1969, Israeli professor Yeshayahu Leibovich is Jewish religious professor. He said, if we, the Israeli Jews, continue to occupy the Palestinian, with time we will lose our democracy. And he used a word that I was horrified because I went to Bergen-Belsen, I know the Jewish history, will become Juden-Nazi soldiers.
Mm.
And then I realized that that reconciliation is needed, not only for people that are oppressed, also to others, because in a slow process, the oppressor doesn't feel it.
Mm.
It eats you from inside like cancer.
Mm.
And if you look into the Israeli Jewish society today, it's divided, fighting among each other, and they are refusing to see that the main reason for their inner division is the ongoing, continued oppression of the Palestinian people. So in the first Intifada, my students from both sides asked me what the other think, because they knew that I teach in both community. When I told them, they didn't like it. I said, you ask me what they think. When I tell you, you don't like it, so you're killing the messenger, you know. And so I said, why don't you meet with each other? You both are people living in the land. You believe in Jesus. I live in Jerusalem, not far away from my home. The tomb is empty. God changed our heart, gave us the Holy Spirit. He did a new man, new community. All those verses from Ephesians chapter 2 and first letter of John. If you claim that you love God, hate your brother, you're a liar. Tons of verses.
Mm.
So they met. It was a disaster. So I said to myself, my students are not mature. The pastors are more mature. They preach every Sunday. They pray. They know the Bible. They went through graduate school. So I brought 7 pastors from each side. The pastors were worse than my students.
Mm.
This is when I realized there are several things that are very important, that the reconciliation, that the main theme of the gospel is much neglected theologically by the church. We want to preach the gospel to people. We want to see them saved. But in reality, we don't want to be reconciled with them. We want them to be like us.
Mm.
But not only that our theology is lacking there, but also because of the complexity of the situation, that they devote most of their time for that. And especially in the light of the fact that you have what we call people-to-people approach. People-to-people approach is something the U.S. government support. If people meet people, they get to know them as human being and brother and sister, everything, it will work out well. Turn out to be false, doesn't work.
Mm.
Why? Because when you develop a relationship and you don't address the pain of your brothers or sister, you abuse them twice. The powerful quiet their guilt about it. So we can have worship meeting, prayer meeting, but we'll never touch the real issues of what's happened now, because we're afraid to talk about it and to talk about the real issues, and immediately say we're not political, but this is another wrong definition. Everything's political. Politics is art of living together. That's what John Stott said. And in a minute we bring our narrative, our story, our life, the powerful side are so challenged that the third party, that the third level, they will withdraw. So let's meet about prayer, let's read the Bible. We call it the Hallelujah stage. We call it the dipping the hummus stage. But let's meet and pray about the situation. And that becoming what we call reconciliation as pacifying and normalizing the oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our reconciliation is really oppressive.
Mm.
We give hand to the powerful to give his position, to keep his position and privilege, and the weak and the poor and the oppressed. He come to the meeting and he feel good, and it is great to pray and to worship, but he goes back, or she goes back to her previous oppressive situation. Because fundamentally, people in position and privilege, without a struggle, they will not let go their position. People in the world will use violence, and we enter into cycle of violence. But we as a Christian, we need to use non-violence way. And Jesus was challenged that. This is what Jesus did. Although Jesus challenged the Pharisees, the Sadducees. Jesus challenged all people. This is the reason they didn't like him and crucify him. Any form of position and privilege that lead to oppression. So we have this cycle. In the first cycle, the Hallelujah stage, the dipping the hummus. When we start talking about it, that lead to the third cycle of separation. We'll never understand each other. We'll never agree with each other. And that also the reason many Christian organizations until today, including this land, that the only things that they do, mostly they do, we meet for prayer, we meet for worship, and we help each other financially, but we don't really deal with the issues that cause the problem. And out of desperation, I started Musalaha in the 90s. It's an organization that had both Israeli and Jews. We had two main purposes: promoting reconciliation among Israeli and Palestinian believers in Jesus around who he is, and to the larger society around biblical principles. And we strongly believe that we have to have the both element, the love element and the justice element coming together. We don't separate them. That means if we care for someone, we cannot just say to them, as Jesus said, here, brother, I'll pray for you, and you send him hungry from home or without a coat. Matter of fact, you cause another damage to the person. So I took 15 Israeli, 15 Palestinian in the early 90s to the desert, and we crossed the desert on camels. And that's where we realized a change. Because the desert deal with the imbalance of power. The Israelis is so powerful, have all the privileges by law, and the Palestinians so weak. Any encounter lead to anger, or lead to that the weak want incentive from the powerful. How it can get permission? How it also, you find it in many societies, including South Africa, during the apartheid, that some people try to appease the white or the Afrikaans in order to get work, to find solution to their problem. Or people turn into anger and violence. So the desert neutralizes the imbalance of power. The desert take away the us and them dynamic. We're the good, they're the bad. We want peace, they want war. It deal with severe process of demonization our community went through, but also give us the understanding that in order to survive in the desert, you need your enemy. That means in this land, there is Israeli Jews and Palestinian. The future of those people depended on each other. They're not going to disappear. And the powerful try to destroy them and kill them, as we see in Gaza. But it's not going to work out. We need to find a way to survive, because your neighbor is, we say in Palestinian Arabic, is more important than faraway brother. And if your neighbor is hungry, is not good neighbor. If your neighbor is thirsty, is not good neighbor. and he will make your life miserable because he cares for his children as much as you are.
Mm.
So in those two narratives, we need to develop a new narrative, imagining narrative where there is equality, equality for both Israeli Jews and Palestinian living in the land. We need to have a place that there is no discrimination, but also we need a place where our distinct identity is kept. The Jews want to keep the Sabbath. No problem. The Palestinians want to keep their culture. So there is, like in the Ephesians chapter 2, and it's really amazing, the different stones, and those different stones are coming together with their uniqueness, but in equality. Equal. In Christ, there is no Jews, there's no Roman, there's no Greek, there's no male or female. It doesn't mean they lose their distinct identity, but they are equal.
Dr. Salim, there's been, that's a lot. It's been wonderful. I feel like I've sat in a lecture. So what I'd like to try and do is summarize what you've said. And maybe you can just make sure that I'm getting what you've said. What I'm understanding that you're saying is that there is this conflict that we're seeing at the moment, but that this conflict has really old roots, historically speaking. The people, particularly after the Holocaust, etc., needed a piece of land. There were then ideological, theological, political elements that were put into play, particularly by powerful structures like Britain, etc., that then helped a group of people establish themselves as a state in that land, and then dispossess people who were living in that space, particularly the Palestinian people of that land. And some of the mechanisms were the development of Zionistic theology, as in two separate people, the Jews and then the Christians, and how the second coming of Jesus would be ushered in by the occupation of the Jews in Jerusalem in that space. And then there are a lot of economic issues that are also coming into play there. So that's kind of what I've understood that you're saying, is that this is much bigger than just Jews versus Palestinians.
Yeah, that's right. And we as the church are part of it. We're complacent, and that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And the Holocaust, it was like it started before the mistreatment of the Jews started before the Holocaust. It started during what we call the breakdown of the big empire in Eastern Europe, when Eastern Europeans were defining themselves, and the Polish people say we are Polish, and suddenly a third of Poland are Jews. What are you doing here? Are you Polish? Who you are? Are you Russian? And so the Jews of Eastern Europe were the ultimate others, with their political, economic, and also Christian ideology that was not nice, bad word, nice, because it was awful to Jewish people in Eastern Europe. But the Holocaust is kind of the trigger that quite the conscience of Western power, with the realization, Balfour realized that from the beginning, 1917, before the Holocaust, that this is going to be on the expense of the Palestinian people, and they knew about it. And some won, and some said, "Oh, okay, we can resolve it." Why we can resolve it? Because we did it in Australia. We did it in America. We did it in Canada. To a certain degree, we did it in New Zealand. But in South Africa, it didn't work out. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so helpful. So I think those are, so for some people listening, this may be the first time that they're getting this contextual picture. And I think that's really important to consider, is that sometimes it's oversimplified and it's made to be such a black and white issue, wherein what you're describing is a very complex and nuanced situation that's going on here, with many, many moving pieces that are not immediately evident on the surface. I think the second thing that I've really enjoyed that you're pointing out is that the narrative of empire versus the kingdom of Jesus and what that looks like, and how empire is coming with force and weaponry and violence, whereas the way of Jesus is really the way of the cross. It's the way of enemy love and nonviolence. And the way that you then demonstrated that through some of your story of taking these people who are supposed to be on opposing sides out into the desert, and how that becomes this kind of equalizing space where people can work that out. But I think one of the key things that has really been helpful is that process of reconciling, that non-violent process of reconciling, what you've really pointed out for us is that that's not an easy process. That's actually a difficult process that requires the telling of stories. It requires the kind of unearthing of pain and trauma. And a lot of the time, because of the pain of what that means, as Christian people or as people wanting a unity, we can settle for a false unity or false peace.
Yeah,
maybe that difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. And so we can stay in the land of praying together and worshiping together and singing together, but we don't go to the hard places of unearthing some of that trauma. And I think that it seems to me what you're advocating for is in the midst of all of this, in all of these things. And I think this was interesting as well. You were saying in this region of the world, the only future is one in which we learn to live together, but that process is going to be a process of difficult reconciliation. Does that sum up some of what you've been saying?
Yes, but I'll add one thing, that it requires a change of structure.
Okay.
That caused, like in South Africa, apartheid was a structure that oppressed people. The end of the apartheid did not resolve the problem of the South African. You have other issues to deal, economic issue. But the South African, the church and the people of South Africa from different, you were able to prevent a bloodshed. And you were successful in that. We're not.
Mm.
And one of the reasons is that the church in South African church, when realized and changed its theology, it was one of the elements that really helped to change. Of course, you have a lot of problems but you prevented bloodshed.
Mm.
And the structure change, now you need to work on economic structure, you need to work on other issues. But this is give you a pathway to move ahead, because reconciliation is dynamic. It's all the time. So I will add to say that as long we have this structure of Jewish superiority in the land, the Zionist Jewish superiority in the land that relate to legal, economic, citizenship, it will not work. It's not working for the Israeli Jews. Military power produce antagonism by the other side. Peace work out. Look, with Jordan, Israel has peace. Not perfect, but there's no war. Israel has peace with Egypt, another Arab Muslim country, but there's no war. Cold peace is much better not having peace at all.
Mm-hmm.
Give opportunity to change and all of that. So as long we hold to that ideology and position, that is not going to be helpful. So I what you said is great, but I think that this structure has to change in order to enable that. And this structure right now, in order to keep it for political global reasons, also in the Middle East, there's another global reasons for that. As long as the West and the church support that, the church become a source of enabling the continuation of the bleeding and the evil that's happening in the land. What I'm proposing is not only good for the Palestinian, I'm proposing that also something, as I tell the story of this offer, is for the Israeli Jews. The Israeli Jews are beginning, hopefully, to realize that military and power, it doesn't work for long term. Every 4 or 5 years, you will have another battle. You have another war. Since the Camp David and the agreement with Egypt, we don't have war with Egypt. It's from the mid-70s already. But here in the situation, we have cycle, because there is a belief, and this is very important. There is a belief that I am chosen, I am superior, the other are primitive, are animal, and the only way I survive in this neighborhood is by using a lot of military power.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't work. And that's what Jesus was saying to the people in his time.
Yeah.
You think that you are going to have military rebellion against Rome and it will resolve it? It will bring disaster on you. No one stone of the temple will stay. And that's what's happened. When the Jewish people in his time chose to rebel against the Roman, they brought upon themselves the biggest disaster at that time. And that is true for everybody.
I think that's great. And I think that kind of pulls that thought together beautifully. One more thing that I would really not want to leave without asking, because I think your perspective would be helpful. And feel free to push back if you're not comfortable talking about it. When I speak to some people who maybe find themselves on the other side of this conversation, one of their immediate responses would be, okay, but Hamas, and you can't talk about peacemaking with Hamas. And I think one of the challenges is how, at least from my perspective, how a group of people has come to kind of be an icon to represent a whole nation, and how there's a difference between what Hamas is and the Palestinian people. And these are not the same thing. And that seems quite simple to me, but I think other people, for them, that's not simple, that's complicated. Your perspective on Hamas and the way that often the Palestinian people and the nation of Palestine is related strongly with that.
Let's put it, there are several issues about it. They used to say that they will never do peace with the PLO. Now the PLO,
what is the PLO?
The Palestinian Liberation Organization. Okay. Now the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Fatah, is the one that worked in Israel and the West Bank. They're the one that did the Oslo Agreement. You do peace with your enemy. You don't do because this is your conflict with. There are, I'm not the defender of Hamas, but also need to be, I want to be careful not to demonize any people groups. And that is, many times we do that because we don't want to resolve it. The way we don't want to resolve conflict when we say that the other people are so horrible, so terrible, it's impossible to have peace with them. Because it's painful for us first, because they hurt us. And second, we don't want to go through the process and pay the price to get to peace. So let's go to Hamas. Hamas has different faces of it, or different streams. There is the stream that we call the Palestinian expression of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a movement that it's a cultural, political movement that want to seek liberation of Palestine, but also seek to bring their own interpretation of Islam. That's something that I will have a problem with that. But also I have a problem with that they also believe that armed resistance is the way to achieve liberation. Hamas, in its ideology, is the same like the Likud ideology and the majority of the Israeli Jewish Zionist Party. Both sides do not believe that the other community has the right for self-determination. The Israeli Knesset just voted majority. There's no place for Palestinian state. So they are the mirror of each other, denying the reality of each other. And that is really important, one. Second, that we need to understand that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, my Prime Minister, he's the one that collaborated with Hamas. He supported Hamas. He gave him the money through Qatar to Hamas. He's enabling them by having two fractions or two groups of Palestinians fighting each other. So they say, I will never sit with them, but in reality, they are all the time sitting and talking. Right now, there is a negotiation about the hostage and also the Palestinian prisoner. 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including children, women, and men that we don't hear a lot about them in the Western news or South African news, that without a trial, including some Christians. So they're talking with each other through third party. So some people say, with Benjamin Netanyahu, we're not going to have a peace. And he proved he doesn't want to have a peace because he did all of those things. You cannot have that language. You have to be engaged with the people. But behind it, there is a process of demonization of other people that also, in the Palestinian side, they are demonizing the settler for their violent action against Palestinians. And what's happening in the West Bank is horrible. It's not in the news. There's no work preventing of water, limitation of medical issues. Read the international report. So yes, people are hurt. People been hurt very much. But in the end of the day, Hamas and the Likud and the different group will have to sit together. So in that situation that we are living in, that we have to be careful when the language we use, when we define the others, and the way we are approaching it. History teaches that in the end of the day, in South Africa, with whom the African set in order to have the peace accord to move there, was Nelson Mandela. He was in jail. He was the head of your political militant group.
Sure, yeah.
And it happened in Kenya. That happened in many countries around the world. That's happened in Israel. You know, as I said, Begin, the Prime Minister of Begin, he was wanted terrorist by the British and by other countries for what he did against the British in the land before 48. And also Shamir was a terrorist. And they become Prime Minister. Yasser Arafat.
Yeah.
History is reality of life is different from our wishful thinking.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to land it here, Dr. Salim, just for time. But I think what's been so helpful there is the way that you have helped us see, again, number one, that there's a lot of complexity around this that we're often not engaging in. And I think that's one of the challenges of our culture, is that so much of our information is very broad, but very shallow, because our understanding of what's going on is about as long as a TikTok reel or an Instagram post, you know. And we have like a historical ignorance that makes us unable to really appreciate or understand the complexity of any given situation. So I think that's, number one, really important for us to remember as we engage with these issues. And then number two, something is so important that you've raised here, is that it becomes easy to perform atrocities on a people group when they are no longer people. When we just have a label, and that label is a demonized label, and then when we can apply that label to a whole people group and then excuse things that we would never do to a neighbor whose name I know, or a person whose story I'm involved in. And so then it becomes easy for us to look at the Palestinian people and go and label that Hamas and throw a whole kind of bunch of ideas into that. And then we can excuse things because of that we would never allow to happen if it was Dr. Salim, who I'm talking to, who's a person in that nation. Would you agree with that idea?
Yes, no doubt about it. And you see it, for example, also in the news, when here in the land, but also I saw it in BBC, When Israeli killed or hostage, you have your photo, you have your name, and hanged all over. But when Palestinian killed, BBC will say 10 Palestinians killed in Gaza. 40,000 Palestinians been killed already in Gaza. Nameless. 16,000 children been killed. Nameless. Faceless. Our media use that all the time, and we have to be careful with it. Every person is created in God's image, is dear to God. He has a name. He has a brother and sister, and he has history, and we need to restore that back. And it is very, 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 we have, in our situation right now, we are 9 months and a half since October 7th. We have normalized genocide. Just think about it. In the Holocaust, it took us time to find out what really happened, or Rwanda and what's happened in Rwanda. We had to do digging in history to find intent and action, because genocide require intent and action. Here we are living in the 21st century. In front of our eyes, leaders say, this is what we're going to do. And they are doing it. And we are unable to stop it. And the reason we are unable to do that, because there are structured power in the world, basically in America, that are preventing, not only preventing stop of the genocide, they are supplying the money, the weapon, and the soldiers, and the ability to continue that. And the American church specifically, not only justifying it, many of them. Just think about it. We cannot watch TV because it's so awful. So in the 21st century, we are observing, experiencing a genocide, and we normalize that, and we continue. Now, I just want to ask you a question, very simple question. Do you think the survival, because you're not going to be able to kill 2 million people, do you think the survival and the relative will be quiet after that? Do you think that they will not do anything about that? Do you think God is not going to bring us to reckon with it? History, if you don't believe in God? That is really dangerous, that we have normalized genocide. We're sorry what's happening. What does mean you're sorry? Are you going to the street? Are you putting pressure on your government? Are you putting pressure on the church leaders to speak up to stop the killing, either Jews, Israeli Jews or Palestinians? Are you involved? Because also Israeli Jews are being killed. Not in the same number, but still, people are being killed. South Africa, by going to The Hague, it is good news to the world, because the Western power and the church were silent, complacent, and enabling and justifying that on the base of a religious political ideology and racism toward the people of Palestine. The Palestinian people are not people. October 7th, when that happened, you have all the Western leaders coming to Israel to comfort the Israeli with the killing that happened at that time. Biden is quiet about it. Not only quiet about Palestinian children being killed, we're talking about 16,000 children. The whole place has been destroyed. All schools almost destroyed. University, churches has been bombed. Mosques have been bombed. Hospitals have been bombed. The sewage in the street. There is polio diseases. There is no water to drink. It is hell on earth in reality. You don't need to go to hell to experience it. Go to Gaza. So there is urgency here that all of us that are quiet, all of us are not doing anything, our children, grandchildren will ask us a question like German grandchildren asking their grandpa in Germany, where were you, grandpa, during Second World War? And we'll not have a lot of excuses because it is in front of our eyes.
Dr. Salim, thank you for, I think, that honesty. I feel like that lands very heavily with me. And there's no way really to respond, I think, other than to just acknowledge that that is true. And I think it leaves me and it leaves us with a deep challenge around what does not only words and ideas, but solidarity with people who suffer look like. And so I just want to, as we close, I just want to really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to have this conversation in the midst of that reality. I don't take that lightly, and I'm so grateful. My prayer as people listen to this is that our conversation will broaden people's perspectives and help them to understand some of the realities that are going on in that part of the world, and then that the Spirit of God will challenge people to get involved in the ways that they're able to do that. And I wish there was a way I could do more, but I hope that this is a small way that we can help with some of the shifting of the story, at least for the people who listen to this.
As a matter of fact, the South African church leaders are one of the few that stood up for the situation. And we honor them and we respect them, and we are thankful for many South African leaders that came and showed solidarity and spoke. And I met some of them, and it is the South African church are I think example for the rest.
Thank you for that, Doctor. And as we're just sitting here, I'm just reminded of that passage that may the God of all comfort you, that you might comfort others with the same comfort you've received. And this reminder that Jesus is the man of many sorrows, well acquainted with pain and grief, and that he walks with you and is present with you in the midst of your situation. And I pray that that wouldn't just be sentiment, but that you would really experience that in a very profound way.
Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. And thank you for all that listening. Blessed is the ear that heard and understood and received, and also understood and act upon it.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
So if you're listening and you are provoked, as I am, by everything that Dr. Salim has shared, you can find links to his books in the show notes. You can also just Google Dr. Salim Munayer, and he's written a number of books. And the latest book you said has just come out.
Reconciling Justice, yes. And you can go to Musalaha website, musalaha.org.
Okay.
And you can find a lot about who we are and what we do.
Right.
We appreciate your solidarity, your prayer, and stand what I think it is true for all of us.
Amen to that. Thank you, Dr. Salim.
That's all for this episode of the Follower Podcast. If you found this helpful, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a review on the podcast. It helps us get these conversations in other people's ears. You can also give a once-off donation or ongoing monthly support to make more conversations like this possible by visiting www.wearefollower.com. Until next time, friends, may you follow Jesus to the depths of his heart and to the ends of the earth.